Lawrence Neal here, and welcome back to highintensitybusiness.com. This is episode 315, and today we're going to be talking about the Colorado experiment and how STG and the team at STG have recently recreated the Colorado experiment and how it's changed their thoughts about training and their approach to training clients. To join me to talk about this, I've got STG owner Mike Petrella and STG general manager Michael Perilli. Gents, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us on, Lawrence.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Great to have you both, especially you, Michael, because this will be your first appearance on High Intensity Business. So I appreciate you taking the time as well. I just thought, to get this one started, I thought it makes sense to kind of introduce what the Colorado experiment is. Obviously, there's a number of people, well, most of the listeners will be familiar, but some won't know much about it. Mike Petrella, do you want to just kick off by just kind of introducing the experiment and why you decided to recreate it?
So the experiment took place in Colorado, as the name would suggest, and Casey Viator and Arthur Jones were the two subjects. Over the course of a month, they performed 14 workouts. At least Casey did. I'm not sure if Arthur completed or not. I know Arthur didn't do any lower body work, but Casey did, and we followed his program. During that month, Casey put on at least 45 pounds. They used kind of an antiquated method of testing body fat, which based on that, I think put him at 63 pounds of muscle. But most people have thrown that out because, like I said, the testing method they use is not really considered valid. But it's not really disputed that he put on at least over 40 pounds during that month. And it was just full body, fairly abbreviated training. With a heavy emphasis on negative only and negative accentuated repetitions. Although there was positive repetitions also performed, it was heavy on the negatives.
Okay, awesome. All right, and some huge numbers there, right? I know that there's also some remarks around that he had an accident, didn't he? Lost a finger or half a finger, and had dieted down as a result of that, or lost a lot of weight, as a result of that. Is there some infection or something like that? And perhaps you know more about that?
Yeah, so we can actually kind of segue right into exactly what we did as well. In both cases, I'd almost say there was a perfect storm that led to the results being as good as they were. Now, we didn't gain as much as Casey, but we were happy with what we were able to accomplish. In Casey's situation, you're right. He had an accident. He had infection. I've been told he almost died from it.
That's right.
And before that, both Casey and Arthur were purposely dieting down. And then when they went to bring Casey back up, obviously calories went much higher. I've been told they were pretty much force feeding him the whole time. And he was also being paid to put on muscle, and the amount of muscle he put on was about the equivalent of the time of a Corvette. So there was a lot of motivation there for him to put on as much as he can. And just a fun side note, when we finished the experiment, I had told Spike, we're going to call him Michael, but I'll probably call him Spike a dozen times in the podcast here, just out of habit. He bought me and the other Mike who couldn't get on the podcast a Hot Wheels Corvette, because I had told him that Casey got the equivalent money of a real Corvette. So as a fun joke, on the last day of the last workout, he bought us Hot Wheel Corvettes.
Hot Wheels is in the tiny ones.
Yes,
like
they're a buck or something like that.
Yeah.
Didn't have the luxury of purchasing real ones.
Yeah, I was going to say, wow, if you purchased a real one, that's very generous of you, Michael. All right, so you guys recreated this as best you could, very closely to the original from what it sounds like. Do you want to just describe why you decided to recreate the experiment? What was the motivation there? And I'll direct that to each of you, actually. So I'll start with you, Michael Perilli. What was your motivation for doing this?
Well, like Mike said, we had the perfect storm. We were off working due to the coronavirus, and anyone who starts working out is always looking at that. What's the best way to do it? How do we get big and strong? And to our knowledge, no one else has ever done the experiment. So we kind of took the opportunity and just wanted to give it a try.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awesome. And what about you, Mike? What was your motivation to do it? Was it the same, or did you have other reasons?
So it's something that I had been wanting to do for some time. I think when I was able to track down the last piece that I needed, there's 14 machines used in the Colorado experiment, and a couple of them are exceedingly rare to get your hands on. So I had gotten the last one a couple of years ago, but the problem with recreating it is you need a lot of time, because not that the workout is unbelievably long, but you need training partners. So the idea would be that the training partners would also engage in it. I never had a plan to just do it myself or just have Spike do it. So you needed the people. And even by the end of it, we were thinking, oh crap, I don't know if we're going to be able to do some of these heavy negatives. We were looking at maybe bringing in another person, even just as a spotter, because the weights got very heavy. But we're pretty busy. We're fortunate that STG is a busy gym, busy company. So when we were basically shut down for the second time, they announced that it was going to be a month. So I actually texted Spike maybe a day or two before it got announced officially and said, hey, if we get shut down for a month, we're going to have the time to actually do this. And that was some of the biggest motivation, that just we had time more than anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, huge commitment. Mike, if you can, try and come closer to the laptop or to the computer, because you're quite quiet. Yeah, that's it.
All right.
Yeah, so fascinating stuff. So I want to get into the method, right? So talk us through the workout. Explain what the workouts look like.
Okay, I'll start with that. So it's I think the average amount of sets was somewhere around 12. I think the longest one was 14 or 15, and I think the shortest one was about 8. The vast majority of the exercise is negative only or negative accentuated. For those who don't know what that means, it's negative only is someone is lifting the resistance to you, or in the case of the Omni machines, which were used, you use your legs to lift the resistance and you lower with the upper body. And negative accentuated is where you lift a resistance with both limbs and then lower it with one. So it was certainly more negative only and negative accentuated work that I have ever done consistently over, I guess you could say, my training career. By the end of the workouts, there seems to be more positive repetitions. And our theory on that is we think we learned a little bit about what their mindset was as they went through the month. At the beginning, for instance, the very first workout, you do negative hip and back. And those muscles are so strong that we could easily perform the negative reps with the entire weight stack. All 3 of us could. And it felt like it was going to break your back in half. It was not a particularly comfortable exercise. And getting that resistance over was not, problematic, we'll say. It never shows up again in the duration of the experiment. And especially when it came to the pullovers, a weight stack that they used was 200 pounds. And I know that I was up over 300 by the end of it. So we're just strapping multiple 45s onto the weight stack. And it really, there's no handles designed to help you get that weight over. A couple of guys just have to get the movement arm, and you have 2 guys beside you trying to do it. It's starting to get a little cramped. So I imagine Casey was far stronger than we ever got. And at some point they're saying, hey, look, we're just going to let this guy do some positive reps because we need more and more people just to lift the resistance.
Yeah, and that's crazy. And he would have been positive reps so that he could be more fatigued, so that you could actually so in his case, maybe they didn't have to necessarily put as much load on for the negative only if he was already fatigued from some of the positive. Is that what you're saying, or that he would help with get the load up?
In some of the workouts at the end, there would be a set of positive chin-ups or positive dips. And then a few exercises later, then you would perform the negatives. So that would be pretty much what you just said, Lawrence. And in some of the workouts, there just was more normal positive sets that were being done. And again, I attribute some of that to he was very, very strong, and we were struggling near the end to get some of those resistances up to do the negatives. So again, as the workouts progressed, I think we got a pretty good insight to what their thought pattern was back in the early 70s.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what was your frequency? How often were you training? That's for you, Michael or Mike. Yeah, Michael.
I'll let Spike get the next one. So it's 14 workouts over the course of a month.
Okay, so what's that?
You're basically trained. You're basically training every other day. There was a couple of days where just based on our schedule, I think they did 28 days. I think we did in 30, just based on schedule. But essentially, you're doing every other day or 14 workouts in a month.
Okay, Michael. Question for you: how are you feeling leading into and after these workouts?
Well, especially at the very start, we came in quite sore, and we were kind of concerned whether we were going to be able to perform the workout or not. Now, oddly enough, even with this soreness and what we felt as fatigue, we were still able to progress through the sets and make good gains on the exercises. So it was kind of daunting going into it, knowing what we were getting ourselves into. For me specifically, I remember coming into the workouts kind of anxious because I knew how difficult they were, especially after the first one. But again, like I felt fatigued, especially my abs after a lot of the negative pullover and the negative chins. I was like, there's no way I can perform this workout. But like I said, we were able to actually progress with numbers, and our strength gains throughout the whole program was kind of astounding for some of them, jumping up not just a couple of pounds per exercise, but 5-10 pounds on certain ones. So
yeah, the results are astounding, and we'll get into those in a moment. But just to follow up on that, Michael, I'm just curious what you think about, in terms of the soreness you felt, right, from the novelty of the training protocol and the programming. Do you think that is just a skill element and that soreness started to go away? Did it make you rethink the idea that we shouldn't necessarily always, quote unquote, listen to our bodies, and maybe training, even when intuitively it may maybe not feel right to train, isn't always correct? Just curious what you think about those things after doing this.
Well, like Mike mentioned earlier, him and I both never did a lot of negative only through our workouts. We would dabble in a few sets here and there, but I think just being overall new to us created that large soreness. And then after the first few, like you felt like your body was working through the week, but it wasn't as intense as the first ones. I think if you were continuing those sessions with that amount of soreness, you would have plateaued.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, makes sense. So Mike Petrella. So Mike and Michael, that's what we said we do. Can you just remind me, what was the number of exercises? Did you say it was about 13 exercises per workout?
I believe the longest session was 14 or 15. I think the shortest one was 8, and it averaged out around a dozen per time you were in the gym.
All right, so pretty high volume, certainly from a high intensity training standpoint. Mike, describe to me, what was the diet you guys were on during this?
So that's kind of fun too. The other Mike, I'll refer to him as Marzinek. We just use his last name because again, there's 3 Mikes. We were talking to him about it on the weekend. We were hoping to get him on, but unfortunately the schedule didn't allow him to. And he just ate meat and peanut butter sandwiches. And that was the extent of his diet. And although he is the heaviest in terms of body fat percentage out of the 3 of us, he felt that he could have eaten more. He actually struggles to get enough calories in. I'll let Spike talk about what he did. But for me personally, I've actually been tracking my calories for roughly 1,700 days in a row now. People say that they can't use the app. I don't know what they're talking about. I can remember a time when we had to get pages off the internet and use a calculator every night. So MyFitnessPal is the easiest thing that's come across. So on the first week, I was eating roughly 3,000 calories a day. And every week after that, I was bumping to additional 200. And that's me trying to just keep up with the intensity of the workouts. The one thing that I find very interesting, I used to hate when people said this, because a lot of times it was these big steroided bodybuilders that were using this term. And they would say there's no such thing as overtraining. You're just under recovering. Well, that's true when you're taking copious amounts of anabolics. But in this case, what it was very interesting. We know when we're going to train again. There's none of this, okay, well, we're going to wait an extra 2 or 3 days because we don't feel recovered. We're trying to keep this experiment as close to what they did in the 70s. So we know that on this day, we're going to train, we're going to do this many sets, we're going to do this much, and it's already in stone. So you're just constantly eating to try to keep up with it. And even I kept my weight on most of the workouts. There's a couple gaps where I just forgot to weigh in before. About halfway through, I actually lost a little bit of weight. And I was like, oh, okay, I got to up my calories again now. And it was just a matter of trying to keep up to that day. So, in 48 hours, I'm training again. So I need to eat. I need to eat a lot. And I was very heavy protein fats on my diet. I don't eat a tremendous amount of carbs, probably average out about 150 a day. So kind of on the higher end of a keto diet. But I do need some carbohydrates. But like I said, every week I was just bringing those calories up because I almost didn't have a choice. If I didn't, I was not going to make it to the next workout.
So you just needed the energy.
Whether it be the energy, whether it be the protein, whether it just be the amount of nutrition, even with what would be my normal maintenance calories are about 400 calories above my maintenance calories. And I know what they are because I've been tracking them for so long. I started halfway through losing weight. So that's how much my body was having to deal with the stress and the amount of tissue that I was obviously breaking down from the exercise.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Michael? What was your diet similar? How was your diet during this experiment?
Yeah, it was similar. So like Mike, I've been tracking my calories for some time now, not 1,700 days in a row like him, but for some time. So I knew what my maintenance calories were. I knew what my surplus calories were. So I believe I started too low. I was at about 2,700, which is normally about a maintenance caloric intake for myself. And then what I was doing my goal was not to put on a bunch of body fat. I wanted to keep that as low as possible and just focus on the muscle build. So what I was doing 2,700, roughly 2,700 on the non-workout days, and then 2,900 on the training session days. And then I found for the first week and a half, 2 weeks, I didn't really gain anything. So I knew I was too low on calories. So by the end of it, I was up to about 3,400. So I wish I had started higher at the beginning of the program than what I did. I think I could have gained more muscle and more body weight. So again, I tried to keep it very nutritious, kept the food clean, but had to get those calories up just like Mike, because I wasn't moving on my on the scale.
Did you have any kind of quote unquote sort of bad food or sugary sort of junk food during the experiment, or were you both really disciplined with that?
I was quite disciplined through it.
Yeah, well, it looks like it based on your pictures.
I generally eat most days what when you say clean, I think most people understand that, which is not talking about processed junk food. That's generally what I eat, but certainly near the end when I was just trying to get the calories in, if someone brought me a donut, I was eating it. And I wasn't going to Krispy Kreme and, eating a dozen or anything crazy like that. But, if I had dinner at my folks' place and there was cake sitting there, I was eating it. But for the most part, it's still, my diet has consisted very heavily of steak, eggs, and raw milk for the past 15 years. So I just upped a lot of the calories from that.
Yeah, very, very similar to my own. And you both looked like, really great. Your before and after photos were quite incredible, and both looked very lean and muscular. So what else was happening? So I know Michael Petrella, you mentioned you were getting a lot more sleep during this. Talk to me about sleep. Talk to me about anything else you were doing for recovery. I mean, it sounds like, just like Casey, this became almost like a full-time job for all three of you.
Well, that's one of the things that we want to get through to the people that start asking a lot of questions online and when we said earlier, is a bit of a perfect storm. All of a sudden, we don't have the work schedule that we did. On a good day, me and Spike can both see over a dozen people without any sort of issue. And now all that time is back to our own. Also, a lot of times when we train personally, we have a finite amount of time between clients. So, we don't generally cut things short, but at the same time, we're aware of time constraints. So, this time around, we can sleep in if we want to. I would say that I average probably about 6-7 hours of sleep most nights. I don't think there was one night that I didn't get at least 8. And on any given day with the naps, I was getting at least 10 hours of sleep, which would be uncommon for me. But even things like, we knew that when we had the 3 guys doing the training, you followed Dr. Wayne Westcott's studies, that you want to be getting some sort of protein in, within half an hour. And I know the anabolic window is something that is disputed by some and accepted by others, but based on his research, he would suggest that you want to get something in, within half an hour. So, we can just pack food into the fridge at the gym and we don't have to worry about eating it in front of clients because the gym is basically empty. So little things like that. I would, eat something about 20 minutes after my workout, and I was just sitting there. And then when everyone was done, I could just go home and I could make a giant lunch. We normally train late mornings most days. And then if I wanted to go if I almost had to go nap on the couch, I didn't have to set an alarm clock. If I napped for an hour or 2 hours, it was just accessible to me to do so. So based on my normal lifestyle, a lot of the recovery that took place would have been very challenging, but just because of the circumstances, it was our second shutdown at the time, we could really maximize our ability to sleep and our ability to eat, even the calories that we ate. It was one of these things where I normally have to schedule my meals around my daily life, my normal work schedule. And this was more of, hey, if I'm hungry, I can eat. Fridge is right there. And as long as I made sure that it was stocked, if I'm hungry, I ate. And, if I just ate it 2 hours later, I'm hungry again, I ate again. And it was just one of these things where you're right, Lawrence, we could almost make it our full-time job for that month.
It's just fascinating because I'm thinking about in the past when I've done, bulking type experiments, which were never successful, the ones I did. But then again, I wasn't training anywhere near as frequently or as intensely as you guys were. And maybe training like probably once a week. And then I found training so infrequent made it really hard to consume a lot of calories. If even that made a difference for someone like me, I'm not sure it does, but it sounds like to me, if you're training with such a high amount of volume and frequency, that it's much easier to then consume more. I mean, all of you are kind of saying that you actually felt like you needed to eat more, right? Is that a fair comment, would you say? I'll throw that to you, Mike.
Yeah, definitely felt like
or both of you, whatever.
Definitely felt like I could have ate more.
Really?
Yeah. Especially at the start. Like I said, I started quite low, and I quickly found out you just needed to eat.
Sure. All right. What about you, Michael, in terms of sleep and other recovery kind of interventions? Was it the same as Mike in terms of like naps and getting 7-8 hours at night? Like, talk to me about your kind of experience there.
Pretty similar. I didn't nap during the day like he did, but I would have got probably 9 to 10 hours of sleep through the night each day. I tracked that and made sure I just wanted to be kind of on top of that and seeing how much sleep I did get. So it was about 9 to 10 hours every night, which is not normal for me during a normal work week. But it's pretty simple. Eat, sleep, train. That was pretty much it.
Cool.
Like no other exercise throughout the week. no cardio or anything like that. It was literally just get that food in, go to bed, and come back and train the next time. But what Mike said there was important. During the normal work week, we're busier. So getting that food in is sometimes tough. Like we normally have stretches of clients back to back, so you're not eating for maybe 4 or 5 hours. So if we were to do the experiment while we were actually working, it would have been quite tough to recover for the workouts because the food would have been down and the sleep would have been down.
Yeah, and the stress higher as well, probably during a busy work week. So I'll just quickly mention some of the results here. So Mike, you put on 14 pounds. You could do a negative pullover for 11 reps of 305 pounds when at the start you could do 225 for 12. So that's an incredible gain. Marzinek put on 12 pounds. Michael Perilli, you put on 8 pounds, and your duo squat went from 427.5 for 20 reps, 10 on each leg, to 520 times 18 reps, which is, again, very significant and impressive. The strength gains, I can 100% believe that and see how that could have been achieved. Slightly more skeptical about the weight gain in terms of how much that is attributed to muscle. So we'll start with Mike on this. Do you want to just describe how you guys measured your what measurements you took?
So we took before and after photos, and we tried to make them, as close to what we could, being a month apart, tried to wear the same underwear, tried to put it on the same wall, and tried to put the camera at the exact same position. We got a tiled floor, so we tried to line it up exactly the same as best we could. In terms of the measurements, just with a tape, we took measurements at the neck, chest, waist, upper arm, upper leg, and calves, and all the body weights were taken on a medical scale.
Right. So you use circumference measurements, and then the medical scale. What did that track body fat percentage?
No, I don't feel that there's any real scale out there that you can buy that can accurately track that. But I do find that even the scales that you would just buy at a typical like big box store, they're not the most accurate. So with our medical scale, it's completely calibrated down, and it just a more expensive, better scale that you would find in a doctor's office when they're doing proper assessments. That's all.
Mm-hmm. So how can you? So that 14 pounds, how much of that do you attribute? How do you attribute that completely to muscle? Is that, if that's what you're claiming?
Well, we wanted to take some sort of in-body or bod pod, and I'm not terribly convinced that them being extremely accurate either. But I do think under similar conditions, if you were to test, you'll get, it'll show something that's probably accurate. But they were all shut down. In fact, there was 2 places within 15 minutes of us that had in-bodies, and you weren't allowed to go to them. You weren't allowed to use them. So that was somewhat unfortunate. And I'll talk a little bit more about it later, but we actually had performed 2 other case studies leading up to this, and the results were negligible at best. So, we didn't know that the results were going to be as good as they were, or we probably would have even pushed harder to get these in-bodies. Outside of the idea that, yes, muscle is mostly water, and how much tissue did you put on versus water retention, all these other things.
Sure.
At the end of the day, both mine and Spike's waist went up a 1/4 inch, and we both had the weight gain. And if you were to look at the before and after photos, I would say Spike's abs look more defined. I would say mine look about the same level of conditioning, but maybe a little bit more pronounced. And in terms of the soreness that we got, my abs were almost sore for an entire month because those negative pullovers and negative chins were just ripping them out. And every time we went to those negative pullovers, I can remember that first rep feeling like that was all you're going to be able to form, because it felt like your abs were just going to come right off the bone. But they just kept performing, and we just kept getting stronger. And the other thing that I'll mention that we all kind of noted, this is all done on Nautilus machines, of course. For as sore as my muscles were for the majority of the month, triceps were another one we all commented were really sore a lot of the time. I had no joint pain. whatsoever. My joints felt great, and we were really lifting heavy resistance relative to what our strength levels are. So the muscles were just dying, but the joints felt good. And again, I wish we had Marzinek on here as well, because he was the oldest subject. I'm about 10 years old in Spike, and he's about 10 years older than me. And again, recovery was a challenge. We were working really, really hard, but to have no joint pain for how much we were, thrashing our bodies was pretty remarkable.
Well, I'm just curious, do you think that the reason you didn't have much joint pain had anything to do with a focus on form and smooth turnarounds and slower speed of movement? Did you focus anything like that at all during these exercises?
I mean, that's certainly going to be, it comes in any exercise program. And the way the negative protocol worked is you were trying to lower that negative in somewhere around 6 to 8 seconds. I think the original Nautilus protocol called for 8. After talking to a bunch of people who claimed they seen Casey train, they said it was probably closer to 5 or 6. So we just averaged it out. And the old Nautilus protocol was you essentially, when you couldn't lower it in 4 seconds, that's when you called it for safety standards. It's kind of what we did at first, but within 2 or 3 workouts, we were going to negative failure. I mean, that weight was dropping because we felt comfortable that we had 2 spotters with us, and no one got hurt or got injured, which was great. But we were really pushing. So the cadence is probably some of it, but I also attribute just to the biomechanics of a properly designed machine. Previous to this, I was doing some free weight squatting just as a challenge to myself to see if I could get up to some of my better resistances from my earlier days. And I just constantly kept straining my adductor doing it. And, I wasn't dropping hard into the hole. I wasn't lifting ballistically, but just the mechanics of a free weight squat. I'm 6'4". You've met me, Lawrence. It just doesn't work well for me. And, but when you get on a Nautilus pullover, for instance, you can overstretch the shoulders if you're not being careful, but, it feels great. It's all muscular tension from top to bottom. And, we're making sure to kind of keep our chest up, keep our posture right. But even on a negative only overhead press on a Nautilus machine, the hands are neutral facing each other. And my shoulders would feel quite tight after one of those workouts. But there was no pain in the shoulders, where if I do a similar barbell overhead press and my hands are facing away from me, I can do it safely enough. And I don't necessarily hurt my joints, but I have felt discomfort in my joints and with a lot lesser resistance than what I'm using on the Nautilus machines.
Mm. What about you, Michael? What can you say in terms of how this experiment was resistant to injury? Did you find, aside from the soreness, did you feel good? Did you feel like your joints were safe? Do you feel like you could take some of these approaches into the training room with personal training with clients and see great results with again minimal downside and minimum risk of injury?
Yeah, so I think I was one of the first ones to note how good I felt through the workouts and the minimum amount of joint pain, because I normally would walk around with some tightness and stiffness through the joints and the upper back, and then a couple sessions in, I'm like, I'm not feeling anything, and then throughout the whole program, I'm like, I feel really good, better than I've ever felt.
Is that because you're using machines you would have used maybe more free weights before, or is it because of the selection of machines, or maybe the protocol?
I think it's like Mike said, the biomechanics of the Nautilus machines, because I would mix up what I used in my other training, but I still use proper form and controlled form. It's not like we were lifting out of control. And in terms of like with clients, I've always been a little bit skeptical using the negative only training with clients just because of the resistance and how intense it can be. But after putting myself through that program, how good I felt and how strong I felt, I started implementing more of that with my clients. Again, done safely and properly, I think it's a more effective way of training.
Cool. No, we're going to get into some of that. That's super interesting. So just to get back to Mike about the measurements, I'm just curious. So you think, okay, so you're looking at the photos and you're thinking, we put on, in your case, Mike, you put on 14 pounds. and you're seeing the photos, you're seeing the differences, and I think we can all attest. We look at the photos, you can see a marked difference in the physiques for both of you, for all three of you guys, actually. And with those photos, are you shooting those photos cold, or have you got a pump? Is it post workout? Are you replicating that each time? That's to Mike.
I believe we did the photos before the first workout and before the last workout. I don't think we took the photos you might correct me if I'm wrong, so I don't think we took the last photos several days after the last workout. I think there was one more workout that we still performed, and we took everything the day of. We tried to keep it as even as we possibly could. I know some of the people online said, oh, so-and-so's flexed, or so-and-so is moving their head to the left instead of the right. And my response was, we're not professional photographers. We literally just took it in the coat room beside the bathroom, and we tried to make it as even as we could. But just to give some context to that, Lawrence, is me and Spike had performed 2 other case studies that we didn't publish because the results were not anything special. So going into this third one, we didn't know what it was going to be. So the first case study that we did, it was 10 weeks, and I believe they were split routines, and it was like upper body push, upper body pull, and legs, training 3 times a week. And on the very first week, it was 2 sets of everything, then 3 sets of everything, and then 4 sets of everything. And then on the mid cycle, or the mid workout, it was 5 sets of everything. And it was taking us a couple hours to get through those workouts. And then you would basically back off and you go back down to 2 sets, and you'd repeat the process for a second time. So the idea was you were purposely trying to almost overreach or overtrain, and then you would cycle back down on your volume. And the workouts were hard because they were so long, and just staying in the gym that long and getting through the volume was difficult. And I was hoping that because that would have been such a new stress to either one of our normal routines, that would have resulted in something. And if I were to show you those before and afters, Lawrence, you look about the same. And even though we were trying to eat the part the same way, we just didn't get very good results. We had another trainer named Connor who was with us on that. And to his credit, he did look different in the upper back in the before and afters on that. Me and Spike looked virtually the same. And then we did another case study with a friend of mine out in the West Coast, USA, and he had helped me achieve some pretty good strength and hypertrophy gains in my early 20s, and he'd come up with a new program. And I can remember us talking about through that case study, we actually hoped it didn't work because the training was so uncomfortable, but it involved a lot of high rep squats, wearing not only compression gear, but kind of like that occlusion training where you're essentially wearing like a tourniquet, and you're taking these heavy custom made pre-workouts, then wearing compression gear, then strapping the working muscle down, and then performing all kinds of high repetitions. And it felt different. I'll give him credit on that. And the pumps were absolutely wild. But again, at the end of 2 months of doing that, we didn't really have much to show for it, which we were happy because we were thinking, how are we going to tell our clients to get into all this compression gear? I think when we were doing upper body, we had a small cotton t-shirt, and then a compression t-shirt, and then bands on our elbows, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. I think we even got wrist wraps on our wrist at some point.
It was wrist wraps, tourniquet, and then elbow sleeves. And then
elbow sleeves, that's right.
And then cotton shirt, 2 sizes too small, and a compression shirt, 2 sizes too small.
That's right. And, the guy who gave us the protocol, I have a lot of respect for him, and he's in very good shape. And he was sending me, I think it was Japanese research that they were big on this occlusion training. I'd read a little bit about it, and we're just, constantly trying to learn and evolve. And instead of just saying that something is good or something's bad, kind of doing it for ourselves. And we were happy that didn't work because it was very uncomfortable. But those are 2 case studies that were both 2 months or longer in duration. So when we got to the Colorado experiment only being a month, we didn't know what to expect. And, had we known ahead of time that the results were going to be so good and so much better than our previous 2 case studies. We probably would have even tried to get maybe a professional photographer to come in, or, really gone out of town to try to get one of those in bodies from someone who would have let us in. So that's partially why we don't have the body fat measurements, but I'm still confident based on the before and after photos. The photos really don't lie. We're bigger, we're stronger, and we got the measurements to prove it.
Yeah, fair comment. This is a good, I think, opportunity to segue into how this is going to change your approach to training long term and approach to training clients. And one of the questions that I think someone submitted was, do you think you would have got better results? And we'll start with Michael on this one. Do you think you would have got better results with edits to the original Colorado experiment? So maybe lower frequency, maybe less volume or less intensity, changing any of these variables? Do you think it would have made any difference to the outcome?
I think the only thing I would look to change is to actually, as much as I don't want to admit it, is to add a little bit more volume per session to legs in the lower body. The set, sometimes it was just one set, like maybe on the duo squat, and it was hard and it was intense, and our legs still grew and we still put on lots of strength. I think by the end of it, we could have used a little bit more volume. I think with the upper body, I wouldn't have added any more. There was a pretty high focus on the volume of the upper body. But I definitely wouldn't take away any, especially from coming off the experiment and doing my own training now. I've kind of been looking back at the workouts and mimicking similar things and mimicking similar volume. And when it's lower, I've noticed it just doesn't feel as good, or I don't feel as muscular, or I don't feel as strong. Going back to some of the workouts or some of the exercises we did during the program and just putting that resistance on is felt immense. And it was kind of like, oh, I can't believe we were doing that on a regular basis. But yeah, I think I would have added more legs to it, just a little bit more volume on that. But other than that, I would have kept it the same.
Okay. And what's your view on that, Mike?
I have a feeling that if we had maybe stretched it out to say 45 days, just based on where we were, we probably could have done a little bit better. Obviously, it's more days to eat. That's more days to train. But I'm saying that if we were to keep the volume and the amount of exercises and the amount of training sessions similar, there's certainly days that I think an extra day of recovery probably would have helped me. But we were trying to do it as they did. We were trying to make sure that things weren't modified. We wanted to be as historically accurate as we possibly could be. It was interesting to see that in some of those workouts, especially early on, we were so sore. The muscles were sort of touch, and we were still absolutely crushing our previous performances. So at least for us, we would have to revisit that as any sort of indicator that we're being overtrained or we're not ready for the next workout. And Marzinek, who again couldn't be here this morning, I train him as a client, so that's how he came to be with us. And his personal sessions with me now have a lot more negative only work. And by his own admission, he says, "Are we constantly going to be chasing the white rabbit now?" In the sense that the results that he got, he was very happy with. They were better than what we had previously attained through, I guess, a more normal, when I say normal, just like positive, mostly failure, high intensity programs. And when I train him personally now, we're not doing the full Colorado experiment. You almost have to be in the right mindset to get through that. But whereas he might be doing one negative only set on any given routine, out of say 10 exercises, he's probably getting 3 or 4 or 5 now, because at the very least we can show that it worked very well for him. And the other thing that I think is important about what we were able to accomplish with this recreation of the experiment is that, and I think the literature would support this, it is still the intensity of effort that seems to be the driving factor in the results, assuming that you're eating and sleeping like we are. Well, I'm not going to discount that part of it, but at least for me, that was one of the hardest training bouts that I have ever had. There's been 3 times in my life where I can remember training that hard. The last one being almost 15 years ago. I was getting ready for a pro hockey tryout, and it was the same idea. I was under a timeline. I knew how many months I had till this tryout was going to be. And for those months, I trained absolutely as hard as I could. I didn't have one cheat meal for months and months and months, because if I succeeded or failed, I didn't want to be that I didn't prepare 100%. So when I was in that gym, it was just another gear of me just pushing with everything that I had. And for this Colorado experiment, I don't know if it was historical pressure or just, wanting to see what was possible. But I can tell you that I normally train pretty hard, and at least for myself, and I would say for the other 2, there seemed to be another gear that we were able to find for a lot of those workouts. And for me, it was able to stimulate a change in an adaptation in my body that I had been previously not able to accomplish with my previous protocols.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, some of you seem to be attributing a lot of the benefits to the sort of negative only training during this, and I guess it's a question to Michael, but I'd love to hear both of your views on this. It's like, well, how can you separate that out from just the fact that you're training more frequently, right, and eating a lot more and sleeping a lot more? So it's hard to pin it on, okay, we had accentuated negatives and negative only, and that help produce the outcome. I'm not saying you're saying that, but is that a fair comment, or do you think there's more value in the negative than I'm giving it credit to? And I'll put that to Michael, and then I'd like to hear your view as well, Mike.
I believe there is more value to the negative, because we were training pretty much the same frequency before the program. Like, we were still training about 3 training sessions per week. Like I said, we wouldn't have as many negative only workouts in them. And just by switching into those, like I said, there was another gear that we had during those workouts, which helped. But I found, like, with the negative only, you could really dig into that one part of the set. Whereas when you're doing a positive set, you start to get lost in the rep, and you're just trying to focus on getting through it. Where that negative one, you can just focus on just do that negative, and you don't have to worry about doing the positive. You just focus on just doing that, and you're able to just kind of push through. And by the time you know it, you're at 12 reps, and then you're like, oh, well, that's a strong set. Sorry, Mike, you can continue on that. Kind of lost my train of focus there.
I think your comment is a fair one, Lawrence. Where I would have been before this experiment, I would have been more in line with you. Whereas I wouldn't say that the negative only was overrated, but I wasn't a huge proponent of it, and I wasn't doing it with a bunch of my clients. But like I said, previous to this case study, we had done the 2 others. So we had done one that really focused on pushing our volume into the red line. And ultimately, that really didn't work for me or Spike. It did a bit for Connor, but not for us two. And then, we had the other case study where, high rep squats. That's been something that they've talked about for 100 years as a result producing method. And there's a lot of research now to suggest that, as long as you train to failure, the repetitions don't really matter, whether it's high rep or low rep, and that's fine. But for me and Spike, we both have, for me, I started training when I was 17. I'm 35 now, and I think Spike's got close to a decade in now too. We came in already conditioned, already well trained. We weren't regaining any strength back. In fact, what we did beforehand, for the 3 of us, we looked at the 14 machines that we were going to use, and we got previous lifetime bests for every single one. So we started at our absolute strongest that we had been at. So not to discount high reps or not to discount using volume, but we had used those as our primary factor in driving the stimulus. And they just didn't give us the results that we would have liked. I mean, hey, I wish all 3 case studies gave us great results, but they simply didn't. So the stimulus was quite a bit different. Now, when you're talking about the food and the sleep, there's no question that it played a gigantic role in what we did. But again, I got my calories tracked. So the eating for when we were increasing the volume and the eating for the Colorado experiment, they were very similar, where I was increasing calories based on how intense or how much volume the workout was. The difference being when I was just hitting more volume, I kind of felt that I was almost not force feeding, but I was really pushing to get those calories in. When it came to this negative only training, I was ravenous. I was eating because I needed to eat, because there was something in my body that was telling me, you need to do this. And even
is that just the muscle damage from the eccentrics? Sorry to cut you off. Do you think that's just down to the muscle damage and the protein requirement or something like that?
It certainly could be. I would have no way of proving that one way or the other. All I can say is from an intrinsic point of view, the stimulus was different and how my body reacted to it was different. And if I had just done it as a standalone case study, it would be harder for me to make some of the assertions that we are now. But because we had done the 2 previous case studies, I think it gives context to a lot of people, because again, we didn't publish it, because at the end of the day, you're just looking at 2 pictures that are 8 weeks or 10 weeks apart. And outside of maybe your hair looking a little bit longer, it just looks like they were taken on the same day, which is, not great. I mean, it's not like we didn't try hard. It's not like we didn't put in the effort. So you're hoping for the result for that effort, and it just wasn't there. So we have been using the negative only more with clients, and again, we haven't been tracking all of the results because it's fairly new. Outside of them finding it to be a little bit more of a different challenge and some positive feedback from the workouts. We don't have anything to prove that it's better, but for at least the case study that we performed, we were very happy with the results.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a moment. It's in listening to both of you, it's interesting because one of the things that's coming through is that you had a lot of motivation. You were like, right, we need to do this experiment proud. We've got the machines, we've got a set time limit. We have 1 month and then we're probably going to be reopening. Let's give it everything we've got. And I thought maybe that's what gave you some additional motivation to push harder to a high level of intensity. And maybe that was also largely responsible for the results that you seem to have achieved. And then I thought, well, actually, who's to say in your previous 2 case studies that you mentioned that you didn't push with the same fervor during those workouts, right? It's hard to well, unless you can comment on that. Do you think you guys push harder in this than you have? Well, you mentioned, I think 15 years ago, you related it to, compared it to that time before your hockey trial. So would you say that you both pushed harder in these workouts than the previous experiments that you've done? And I guess both you can answer that. Michael, you could start.
I like to say whenever we're doing a case study or in our own training, we're trying to give it everything we have. We're always looking to improve and to see if there's another protocol or another way of training that's going to be more effective. So I like to say with we like to be having a lot of integrity when we're doing our training. So I think it was pretty spot on for us to be, sorry, lost my train. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I'll say this, Lawrence, on Spike's behalf, that he is one of the hardest training people that I have trained. And, that you could easily chalk up probably 1,000 people or more that I've seen. So intensity has never really been an issue for him. Now, how do you quantify us saying that we think we found another gear while doing this? It's difficult. So, I mean, how much harder did we train than previous case studies? Is it 5%? Is it 10%? Is it even relevant? It's hard for me to say or to quantify that. It's just one of these things where the load that was placed on our body, the machines that we did it on, and the way that there's almost a camaraderie between us, it worked exceptionally well. And yes, we were in, if I were to do this with the average person, I do not think they're going to put on 14 pounds unless they can do the sleeping and the eating that we were able to do because of the lockdown. It's all part of a big picture. But again, even when people want to discredit what Casey did with the 40 pounds and the big one, they say, okay, well, he was just regaining muscle, muscle memory. One thing I like to tell people is try to find anywhere where someone's referring to muscle memory before 1973. You probably won't find it. So, I mean, we can look at it from our perspective now in 2021, say, oh, yeah, well, that's just what it is. People didn't know that back then. I'm not saying that there weren't bodybuilders who didn't understand that this was occurring because they had taken layoffs and come back. But even the way they put the experiment together for that time period was revolutionary. And what I even like to tell people is I think Casey got within 6 pounds of his competitive best. And he did in 28 days. To put in perspective, when Arnold Schwarzenegger came back in 1975 for the Mr. Olympia, because they wanted him for pumping iron, he did not reach his competitive best of 1974. And he had months and months and months of training to try to get there. So, I mean, obviously there's something to do with the stimulus and there's something to do with the intensity, because whether you believe Casey was on steroids during the Colorado experiment or not is almost irrelevant to this particular argument, because we know that Arnold certainly was. So let's say that Casey was, just for argument's sake, so we'll say that the drugs are a wash. He was still able to get a much higher percentage of his previous best in a much shorter amount of time than was arguably the greatest bodybuilder of all time.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving into sustainability and training clients, I mean, it almost goes without saying that this is practically impossible for most people to sustain unless you're, some college kid who's got no responsibilities and all the time in the world, or a high school kid or whatever. I can't see many people really sustaining this. I'm guessing you guys haven't sustained it, and I'm guessing that you've probably lost a little bit of weight. Is that true?
Well, for me personally,
sorry, Michael. Yeah.
Me personally, I kept my calories up at 3,400 post experiment to kind of see how my body reacted, just with the difference. Like if the training was a big difference. I've noticeably seen a difference in my muscularity without doing the workouts from the experiment. As far as training clients with it, hang on.
Stop there a second. So you've actually think you've put on more muscle since the experiment? Is that?
No. Okay. I think it's gone down.
Even though you increased calories, but you reduced volume, you think it's gone down because of that? Is that right?
Yeah. So I stopped doing the workouts from the experiment, obviously, kept my calories the same at where I left off with, and I believe my muscularity has gone down.
Got it. Sorry, you were saying about clients. I cut you off.
Like you said, if you're not a college kid with the time and no schedule, I don't think it's possible to achieve similar results. And the mindset's a big thing too. I find with my clients, it's hard enough to get them to perform one of our normal workouts. You got to be kind of in that sixth sense of mind to want to do this program and do these workouts.
So to follow up on that then, how have you introduced some of these protocols or what you've learned into when you train clients? Like, what are you doing differently?
Well, like Mike said, I'll mix in maybe 1, 2, 3 negative only sets or negative accentuated sets into one of our normal programmed workouts. Not switching completely into one of the completely negative only, but introducing sets here and there.
And had you been doing anything like that before? Had you done negative only with clients before, or is this really a first for these types of protocols?
I've had a couple clients, ones that were very into training that they've kind of dabbled in the negative only and different protocols here and there. But ever since performing the experiment, kind of implementing it into more clients.
Mm-hmm. And what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What sort of feedback are you getting?
It's still early. It's not like they've been doing it long enough to see an objective view of it. But just them seeing they like the workouts, they like how it felt, and nothing more than that right now. As training goes on, you can kind of get more of a real view of the effects.
One of the things I've noticed with negative only or negative accentuated training is is it's a great tool to use if you've got someone who really doesn't like training with a high level of intensity. So someone can't get to muscular failure, you can use negative techniques to provide a bit more volume and provide a bit more fatigue and ultimately get them there. So I've always thought there was a lot of benefit. I just never believed that there would be any value beyond like a concentric failure set, aside from assuming the person has got to muscular failure of a concentric set. That's been always my worldview. But Mike, I'd love to hear your view on this as well. Same questions that I just asked Michael as it relates to how this is changing the personal training programming at STG.
So we're certainly using it more with our clients. We're still using it sporadically. Like, it's not the dominant method that we're using. We've had a couple people, this will get more into the business aspect of it. We've had a couple people ask us, well, why don't we just do some sort of almost like month-long course where somebody paid to do the experiment as is and see what the results would be. And it's something maybe we could market, but we actually worked out what the cost would be. It's a cool idea, but if you take our average client who's training once to twice a week for half an hour, we timed all of these workouts. In general, Spike was normally the quickest to go through them. Spike probably could do most of the workouts in about half an hour to 35 minutes. I was normally around 40 to 42 minutes. And then Marzinik, who is the older gentleman, he was normally closer to 50 minutes. Now, we didn't implement the rush factor. That is something that people get wrong when they talk about the Colorado experiment. There was no rush factor employed. That was more than 75 during West Point. But I mean, these times, they represented how fast we could really get through these workouts. Spike was just a little bit better condition than us two. So for several of these workouts, the average person would need to buy 2 half-hour blocks, and they would also need 2 trainers, because maybe if I had a beginner, you could, or someone who wasn't particularly strong, you could get through the negative only with 1 trainer. But very quickly, even an average sized, average strength adult male would need 2 trainers, certainly for the last 2 weeks, if not the whole thing. So to train 3 times a week, blocking off at least an hour and 2 trainers every time is going to be somewhat cost prohibitive for most people. So even if it is the best methodology of training, I'm not suggesting that it is, but even if it was, it would not be the cheapest form of personal training that there was ever invented. And the other thing that would make it difficult with, say you're just using conventional tools, you're doing it with a barbell, you have to have those spotters or those trainers with you. You simply cannot do this by yourself. It's not possible. So I could see very quickly, if you didn't have 2 very motivated trainers or training partners, them not showing up, you just can't do that workout on that day. So there are some, I guess you could say, logistical issues with implementing it into a business model. But I do think that, at least for us, we're looking at putting more negative only and negative accentuated training into the average routine for the average person. As for, you asked Spike about where our gains or where our body weights have been since then. I have brought my calories pretty much back down to maintenance most days, with a slight surplus on my training days. And I'm at the exact same weight that I was at the end of the experiment. So I haven't gained anything since, but I haven't lost anything that I gained. And that's on lesser calories, but still certainly not in any sort of deficit of calories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. So what's your price per workout at STG approximately?
We're $65 a session.
So you would basically be charging, most people, let's assume they take an hour and it'd be 2 trainers. So you'd be charging for 4 sessions per session, basically, right? Is that how you priced it?
It'd be about $260 per session, and it'd be 3 times a week per month.
That's hilarious. So that's like, what's that? 520, 790 per week, right? Am I right on that? times 4, what's 800 times $3,200 a month, roughly speaking, for the training, not including the food. And you probably have to do the food or something.
We'll round it down to 3,000.
Michael, what was that?
I'm open for people to pay that for us to do it. Like, don't get me wrong there.
Well, here's the thing. The reason I wanted to price it up is because there are people that are so motivated to do something like that. And, so, I mean, how many people do we know who just want to pack on muscle, right? Who would be price insensitive to that. So I think there are people out there who would fork out the money to do it. So
that may be got a whole business model on our hands.
Yeah. But this is the thing, isn't it? It's I think a lot of us in high intensity training, we're not really targeting the individual that wants to do something like that or cares necessarily about that as much. So it would be probably a bit of a deviation, right, for a lot of our colleagues, I think. So just to carry on from what you were saying there, Mike, in terms of I'm just really interested to hear more about the programming, how it's changed the programming for clients. I was going to ask you why. So even though clients aren't going to be doing all of the things, the eating, the training volume, etc., that you guys did to get the gains, why do you then think it's beneficial to throw in these techniques with clients? Is it just to give more variety and maybe produce better results? Like, what's your thinking there?
Well, to kind of get an idea of our business, Lawrence, and we actually talked about it a little bit the last time I was on the podcast with you. We have certainly switched more so towards a medical model. And what I mean by that is we do a lot of rehabilitation. We have all the MedX medical machines. We have a physiotherapist pretty much on the floor every day, and we're going to be bringing on an athletic therapist as well. So even a lot of my day-to-day work is with somebody that has some sort of injury or some sort of orthopedic concern. And even a lot of the equipment that we've bought over the last couple of years has reflected that, especially when you look at the Dynavex pieces, like their gluteator and their plantaris. And as I just mentioned, the MedX machines. So that is largely the bread and butter of what we do. We probably see less people who would be interested in, say, a 30-day or 60-day makeover or case study or something like that. It just so happens that myself and Spike and some of the other trainers and certain clients are very passionate about the iron game and weightlifting. And as you know, Lawrence, I used to run a pretty successful powerlifting team. So it's almost a difference between good business and also being interested in what you do. So I do enjoy when a young athlete comes in the door and they say, okay, well, I have 2 months before my next tryout and I want to put on the most amount of muscle I possibly can. Yeah, that's a good challenge. And we enjoy it because we don't see a ton of it. And what we just did is going to be very applicable to something like that. How much can we stress their body within reason and get the absolute fastest results we can? Whereas someone that comes in just because they got a partial tear in their shoulder, am I going to get them on an Nautilus Omni shoulder and get them to do heavy negatives? Probably not, even though I think the machine is quite safe. And I do like how slow the cadence is for our negative only protocol. We could certainly look at it, but it's just maybe having, I know a lot of our colleagues, they like to have their ideal target market, the person that they go after. And certainly we do have the medical side of things that is probably producing most of our revenue. But we have our youngest client is 12, our oldest client is in their 80s, and we see everything in between. So the goals are not going to be the same. And we do pride ourselves on having a facility that can accommodate everyone, even though we're not targeting everyone, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. So just to clarify then, like, can you elaborate, on why you're using these different these techniques that you picked up from the experiment? So I don't think you quite covered that. So in terms of the using negative accentuated or negative only, like what's different? Like, come on, like pre-Colorado experiment, what were you doing with those clients you just mentioned versus now?
So again, I think I did something with you for your business members podcast where I went through what would be a typical routine at STG, pretty much from start to finish. The exercise selection and the full body nature of the workout really wouldn't have changed. It's just this idea now that instead of maybe doing 10 sets to positive failure and one of them to negative failure, maybe we're doing 3 or 4 with the negative now. And the other thing is we're fortunate we have a pretty good selection of equipment, but we buy new stuff. We talk about there's certain pieces that we buy that is more for the average population, and there's certain pieces that we buy that only your big, strong, over 6 foot, generally clients are going to use and benefit from. You know, a lot of those old Nautilus machines, there's several middle-sized women in our gym that have probably never used almost any of them because it just doesn't fit them well. But now we have to kind of revisit this and say, okay, well, maybe we need to put an extra seat underneath of them. Maybe we got to adjust the machine to them, because if we can give them a potentially better stimulus and get them potentially better results, we need to look at this as a viable option for our clients. And whereas I used to view negative only exercise as something to just add some intensity into a set or a workout, or something that maybe I was always under the impression that was very hard to recover from. It was harder than the positive because of the increased load, that, well, maybe people can recover from more than I initially thought they could. And it actually raises more questions for us than possibly answers moving forward. But we have to look at the results that we got and say, okay, well, if this worked so well for us, there's no reason to suggest it won't work. Maybe not equally as well, because what we discussed with the nutrition and the sleep, but better than what we have been doing. And I think even some of our other practitioner colleagues have maybe even been ahead of us on this one, of going past positive failure on more of their sets than we used to.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Some obviously have employed negative techniques or negative only techniques for a long period of time, and feel that they are sometimes more productive when combined with more traditional techniques. Although I know Discover Strength partnered with, I want to say, Dr. James Fisher, and maybe James Steele was on this as well, where they reviewed the different techniques. And I think the conclusion from that one study, and obviously that's just one study, was that there was no difference in the outcomes. But then I don't think I can't remember if they were monitoring food intake and all those other variables. So I'm not sure if it's conclusive.
To give you some context there, Lawrence, if I was to take, say, 100 people out of the general population, and I had them do positive, negative, like normal reps. I say positive only, they'd be doing the lowering along with it, and then negative only, with obviously the more load, and everything else being equal. I'm not convinced yet that the results would be terribly different. I think that the research that they did is probably fine. What I can tell you is, at least from a personal standpoint, that the stimulus for me was different, and it changed the way that I had to adapt my lifestyle to it. If I adapted my lifestyle to doing positive, negative reps with the same counterbalance, maybe the results would be the same. What I'm trying to get through is we almost didn't have a choice if we wanted to get to that next workout. Now, if I had waited a few more days in between, that might have changed things as well. And to talk about Dr. James Fisher, I've been fortunate to be in touch with him. And we've actually sent all the training logs to him, because every set, every rep, time under load measurements, we tried to take as much data as we can. And we've sent everything to him in the hopes that maybe it becomes some sort of published open source writing that people could get more into the information. So I think that he even has an interest in what we were able to accomplish. And like I said, it has at least changed my view on the subject. Maybe it changes Dr. Fisher's too once we get through everything.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to see what he comes out of. I saw his note about that. Michael, what do you think you'll be doing differently here on out for your own workouts for yourself?
I've definitely incorporated more negative only into my training workouts. Mike and I both like to take on new case studies all the time. So if we're not doing a new one, then I'm definitely going to incorporate more negative only. I can see myself doing the experiment again later on in life. Again, willing if Mike would do it too, because you just need the spotters. But just going off of what I've felt and how I felt during the program and how I felt after the program, like I said, I felt more muscular. I felt stronger. Whether that's actually true or not, it felt good. So I can definitely see myself doing it again at some point. It's not something you could do year round. It's just too intense to maintain. But definitely incorporating more negative only exercises into my training.
So you didn't feel, obviously you were eating a lot and sleeping a lot. You didn't feel drained around during the time?
Post workouts, yeah, but not like for the rest
normal.
of the day or anything like that. I mean, Mike maybe because he had to mix in his naps, but
I'm just curious about the sustainability of it because, you know, obviously it's at least for high intensity training, it's high frequency, it's intense. I'm just wondering if, let's say, for example, that you recreated a kind of, I don't know, simpler version of the Colorado experiment, but turned it into a training protocol for a client, like an 10 session training protocol. Like you could have obviously a negative only or negative accentuated program with a higher frequency, but then you just have to be mindful of their requirements for sleep and food, right? And if they didn't get those things done, then they might not get any improvement from that program. Just curious what you guys think of that. Michael, if you want to give your view on whether that's a program you think would be worthwhile doing with clients, or if you think it's just not really viable.
It's tough because I find with clients, the average client isn't preparing themselves enough for their sessions on a typical basis, on a normal basis. So I think to expect them to prepare themselves for something similar to this is not viable, in my opinion.
Yeah. Mike, what do you think?
Well,
like a watered down version.
I kind of want to get back to the actual experiment itself to answer this. So earlier on, I was saying that I felt that we kind of learned a lot of what their mindset was in 73 by going through the experiment. So for instance, and Spike will remember, I think it's the third or fourth workout was that 14 or 15 set workout. I think I averaged about 37, 38 minutes per workout. And I think I was about 51 minutes in that workout. I think Marsnick took over an hour. And I can remember we walked away from that to, holy crap, like this is just at the absolute limit of what we could do. And then from that point on, the workouts had a little bit less volume. And then as the month went on, by the end, not that it was easier because we were that much more conditioned, but it was easier because some of the exercise selection got easier. It went from doing 3 or 4 sets for legs to the last few workouts was just 1 set for legs. You get some positive wrist curls in there, which, regardless of how hard you want to train them, is not like negative only pullovers or negative only chins. So even when they were going through it, I feel like they might have been looking at Casey and saying, look, even he can only take so much. So the first 3 or 4 workouts are harder and longer than the last 3 or 4 workouts are. So I feel like even they were starting to figure out what was the upper limit of what they could do and what they could produce. I will say personally, when the experiment was over, I was happy it was over. I enjoyed it. I'm glad we went through it, but it's like those people that are in the Army, they look back at basic training 10 years later. It's like, oh yeah, those were good times. But when you were doing it, it wasn't good. Like it was very, very challenging. At least it was for me. And when that month was over, I think I said to both the mics, okay, well, that's the last time I'm doing negative only for a few weeks. Because even though it worked, even though the results were there, and even though we had gotten through it and we're happy about it, it was one of these, okay, well, I'm done with this for at least a few weeks now, regardless of how well it worked. And the other thing that I would almost like to do, my problem is I got an ethical dilemma with it. This is the first time in my life I've been accused of taking steroids, which I just consider to be fantastic because I've been waiting for someone to accuse me of that for a very long time. Spike gets accused of it daily. But I will say that not only were we, of course, completely clean, but the 3 of us, none of us have ever taken anything. But I would be curious if we did exactly as is, but with anabolic help, and not even a ton. You look at like a Don Holworth taking 10 milligrams of Dianabol back in his day, not like these stacks that these pros are taking now. I would just absolutely love to see what the results would be, because I think we could double or triple them. And that would then lend the idea that Casey was on during, I personally believe he wasn't. I know he was on certainly at times beforehand and certainly after. But then instead of people saying, oh, I think you took steroids, like, no, this is what it was when we did it clean. And then, okay, this is what it was when we did take them. But I'm not much of a drug guy, and we certainly don't cultivate that culture at our facility. But to say that I wouldn't be curious would be a lie.
Yeah, interesting. Gents, really appreciate you both taking the time today. It's been fascinating to learn about the experiment, and congratulations on getting it done. I think you did the community proud. And I know there are lots of people coming out of the woodwork, tons of people sharing the Facebook post and commenting, showing their gratitude and appreciation, because I think you've really inspired a lot of people to try something new in their training, find more motivation for their training, and continue the learning on this topic. So what's the best way for the listeners to find out more about you guys, Mike?
We're on most social medias. You just type in STG Strength and Power. It'll come up on Facebook and Instagram. STGstrengthandpower.com is obviously our official website. And both myself and Spike and the rest of our team would be happy to get back to you with any questions you may have. Awesome.
Thanks very much for joining me today, guys. Really appreciate it. Michael, thanks for joining me on your first appearance on High Intensity Business. And for you're most welcome. For everyone listening, to find the blog post for this episode, please go to highintensitybusiness.com and search for episode 315. And until next time, thank you very much for listening.